Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Day 1 of practice in Baku is over. The usual suspects on top as per usual. Red Bull seemingly are having to deflect complaints and protests from other teams with regard to, once again, DRS issues emerging here for Max Verstappen. They reckon they can fix it. The other teams, though, believe there might be a competitive advantage in what is going on right now with Max's DRS flap, and Mercedes admitting they're going to have to find an awful lot of pace on the straight lines if they want to compete this weekend. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Let's crack straight on with the whole rear wing discussion, because most teams have realised here in Baku that the straight is basically 2 kilometers long. It kinks a bit early on, and then there's just a monstrous straight down towards the start finish, as I'm sure you guys are aware. Rather bumpy track actually as well. The porpoising does seem to be back, but it definitely seems to affect teams more when there is a bumpy surface, as we saw, for example, in Monaco, but also here in Azerbaijan. It's most certainly a thing. We kind of saw that the Mercedes, when it's looked best so far this season, was in Barcelona, of course. In Spain, very flat track really. And of course, their upgrade for Barcelona seemed to look rather good there. So far this weekend's, and also Monaco last time out, hasn't been the case at all. So Red Bull and other teams decided, okay, let's just run a really small rear wing, as small as we can realistically get away with. This is what they've been planning to do. And their straight line speed on FP1 was absolutely monstrous, partly to do with possibly the fact that, they've got their second power unit in the car now. So they've put the second power unit in. Most other teams have done this earlier on. Bottas apparently has already taken his third one. So that puts him, right on the bubble, ready for a penalty going forwards. But of course, as we saw in, for example, Spain a couple of races ago, when the Red Bull didn't seem to be quite as dominant in a straight line as it was, let's say, in Miami, that was kind of reaching the end of that, maybe the lifespan of the power unit 1, whereas Mercedes, I'm pretty sure, and Ferrari had upgraded at that point to the second power unit. So maybe that was why they didn't look quite as dominant, despite still getting a 1-2 at the end of the weekend, right? But now with the second power unit in, are they going to be way more dominant in a straight line? Certainly seemed to be the case at the start of practice 1, free practice 1, but again, here we go with the porpoising issues that certainly Ferrari and Mercedes seem to be dealing with again in the straight lines here. So it did seem to kind of be tuning out a little bit towards the end of the day. Of course, it depends a lot on ride height, but I think that's the thing with the cars, the way they're designed can, of course, with the ground effect, when the bounces are there, naturally, and the bumps are there in the track, it can kind of cause porpoising, whatever the ride height is, and effectively you have to raise the ride height to get rid of that effect, even though the car aerodynamically might be better than it was before. So it's kind of an interesting one, to be honest. Now, this was the main point of the contention of the day, really. Max Verstappen's rear wing flapping around. We've seen it so many times already this season, Max Verstappen, even last year for a bit, having some sort of DRS issues. Of course, the big one was back in Spain, where it couldn't overtake George Russell, largely to do with the fact that his rear wing wasn't necessarily complying. As we can see here in the straight, it's bouncing and flapping up and down all over the shop. I think we saw this last year. Was it maybe Qatar towards the end of last season? We saw a similar thing with the rear wing flap bouncing all over the shop. And the regulation is you're only allowed 85 millimeters of a gap here. So I'm sure a lot of teams are saying, okay, when it does this to the top end, is this gap greater than 85 millimeters? It probably is in places, and then when it of course comes down, this gap is going to be lower than 85 millimeters, right? But at times this is probably breaking the regulations, because it's very flexible. We know that they like to push the envelope as much as possible as to what is possible. We saw that their explanation for the reason why the flap didn't open properly back in Spain was because of the weight saving exercises that they had done, and maybe there's something they've done here as well to get to the point where the DRS again is having some problems. I think they fixed it to a degree in FP2. Verstappen said it was okay, but you can't rule out this problem coming back, because they are certainly doing everything they can to lose all the weight and make the car as efficient as possible. But these DRS bouncing up and down issues like this seem to be a little bit of a result of it. Now, at the end of the FP1, it's once again Sergio Perez, who seems to love this circuit, at the top of the timesheets. Again, so far this weekend, he's outperformed Verstappen in both sessions so far. It does definitely raise an interesting picture, right? Because if he qualifies above Verstappen again, and even outraces him this weekend, then we have a real conversation on hands about who's the world champion going to be this year, because Verstappen's only, 15 points ahead of Perez right now. It's a tight battle in the Red Bull camp, and he seems to have been spurred on by his new contract signing. Leclerc was P2 in this session 1, but these fastest sectors from FP1 were really interesting, to be honest. We look at Perez, we'll just look at the top 4 right here, because Hamilton and Russell were P6, P8. It got worse than as the kind of day progressed. But at this point, you can see Leclerc was getting so much time in Sector 2, half a second quicker than the Red Bulls in Sector 2, but he was losing 0.2 and 0.4 pretty much in Sector 1 and Sector 3, right? So Leclerc was effectively gaining half a second in the middle sector and losing it all on the straight lines in Sector 1 and also in Sector 3. Now, it must be said there was something going on with Leclerc's energy recovery unit here. They weren't using it at the start of the lap, only at the end, so he was losing more time in Sector 1 than he would have been otherwise. But, still, they changed the setup quite significantly for FP2, though, saying that, okay, let's not take as much of a gap in Sector 2, let's try and maximise the straight line speed, because I'm sure this weekend they realise that if they're fast in Sector 2, but fall back in Sector 3, like Verstappen, Perez is just going to breeze past with DRS with the straight line speed advantage they had in kind of FP1. Like if you look at kind of velocity max here, Red Bull were at 331 kph, Ferrari at 321. It was Alpine right up there with the Red Bulls as well. They are rapid in a straight line, and Mercedes one of the slowest on the grid, right? So Red Bull had a massive advantage in FP1, but was not the case as time progressed. Red Bull were kind of working on this rear wing flap, trying to deal with that. They took it off, tried a few different things, and Christian Horner said that actually Ferrari and potentially Mercedes as well have already lodged some complaints. This is the article describes. When asked if Mercedes or Ferrari could soon complain to the FIA about it, Horner laughed that they already had. Horner said, I think they've already done that, right? Already complained, already put a protest in. I think we heard Ferrari probably have done this already, just because, look, if that happens in the race, the 85mm thing, like, could be called into question once again. Obviously, we have seen it, we've got the data from it, we've got the comparison to Perez's wing, which is okay, so I think there's some modifications and some tuning that we need to do to make sure we eradicate that for this afternoon. He does reckon, though, it doesn't give you a performance advantage, saying that, yeah, our men are on top of it, hopefully it'll be cleared up in the next session, but Johnny Herbert was, that looks rather unstable, the whole wing is flexing, so like, yeah, it probably doesn't give an aerodynamic advantage, but it might be just one of these things they're trying to push the envelope so far that issues like this do tend to arise. And maybe if it was to happen just like that in the race itself, then maybe that would be against the regulations, given the whole, you know, the distance thing that we just talked about, right? So yeah, they like to push the limits of the regulations, there's no doubt about that one, but you know, Ferrari also decided for FP2, they're going to bring a new rear wing into the conversation here. A new low load rear wing came out for Ferrari, and this completely changed the picture and the dynamic of where the cars were fast. Ferrari was now much quicker on the straights and gained less time in Sector 2, but it was much more competitive with the Red Bulls, which certainly they need to be, I think, if they want to stay ahead this weekend, because of course generally they've been the better qualifying car, Red Bull's been the better race car so far this year. Mercedes also had trying some things out, a new kind of, well, old and new front wing situation. The flappage on this slightly different, flappage not really a word, but you guys know what I mean. But you know, also they were also trying to run a thin rear wing. Now Alpine especially used this to great advantage. It didn't really seem to work that well for Mercedes, right? They had a similar idea. Okay, let's also have a very low downforce rear wing that we can bring through here, but yeah, still didn't really seem to affect them that much. But the Alpine is an absolute monster in a straight line, it's got to be said. Like, this thing is an absolute rocket ship, especially with a toe there, and that's the thing, the straight is so long that having a toe behind your teammates or behind other drivers on the straight is going to be massively important, potentially to getting those few extra kph, which could secure pole position or qualifying positions this weekend. One driver that didn't get a finish this session was Alexander Albon, because somehow he clattered into this wall. This is basically at the start of the straight, or the curvy straight initially, then it goes onto a straight. Don't know how he honestly hit this. I guess maybe he was looking at something or was a bit kind of you know, caught off guard, but not sure really how he smashed this wall with his inside tyre, and effectively broke some of the front suspension. That to get fixed, he, well, couldn't really do it for the rest of the session. I'm sure the mechanics were like, what was going on there, Alex? But yeah, after FP2, a very different story in terms of straight line speeds. Verstappen, again, the Red Bulls were 331 kph, but this time it was 329 for Leclerc, and actually 335 with Latifi's toe in front of him, right? So I'm pretty sure he got a little bit of help from a toe from the cars in front. He tops free practice too, but I mean, yeah, it must be said, the speeds on paper rather similar after that session, so definitely creates an interesting dynamic going into, well, qualifying and the race itself. The Red Bull might not necessarily quite have the straight line speed advantage that they seem to have before, but really it was Fernando Alonso who was just absolutely bobbing it at a straight line, and he was P4 in the session. A remarkable performance from him. Definitely, yeah, the question has been so far, who's going to be the best of the rest? So far this season, it's generally been George Russell. Lando Norris has been there or thereabouts at times, and maybe Alonso this weekend could be that guy as well. This was the second practice classification. Leclerc, Perez, Verstappen. Again, Perez a little bit up on Verstappen, right? So definitely an interesting one to keep your eyes on there. In terms of race pace, actually, we'll look at that actually here in a second. But yeah, Leclerc once again on top. Sainz had a pretty difficult time this session actually, but I'm not sure he got too many clean laps in. And yeah, the Mercedes must be noted, because Alonso here is P4, but like the Mercedes P12 for Hamilton, P7 for George Russell. They looked reasonable through Sector 1 and Sector 2. They're only a couple of tenths down on the leaders, but then through Sector 3, on the effectively when the straight starts, they lost an awful lot of time on that straight, right? So this is certainly something they've got to think about, because their straight line speeds, maybe to a degree it's power unit tuning, they can turn it up and gain time, but they're not going to gain that much time, to be honest. They were talking also about the way the tyres went in the window, you know, they love to talk about stuff like that. This also just to kind of show it, right? This is the gap between the fastest sector. The fastest Sector 3 goes to Alonso. Usually Alpine do kind of like to run a little bit, you know, faster engine modes than some of these other top teams on Friday, for example, but still, he had the fastest Sector 3. It was the Ferraris with the fastest Sector 1, Sector 2. I think Sainz actually had a great Sector 2 and then backed out on his fast lap for Sector 3. That's why I remember he didn't get a put in a particularly representative time. But yeah, the Mercedes about half a second down in both Sector 1, Sector 2, and then lose an awful lot in Sector 3, right? So this just goes to show that despite what they look like in Spain, they've got nowhere near what they need to have in a straight line here to actually compete this weekend. So again, up top, it's very closely fought affair. But yeah, Sector 3, both Alpines in the top 3 sector times here, and Alonso, of course, P4 overall. Impressive stuff stuff from them. Now, race pace simulation, rather different story. Generally, we have seen that, of course, the Red Bulls are slightly quicker than the Ferraris in terms of race pace, the other way around in qualifying. Now, Verstappen only did 3 laps on the soft, had a slightly faster time than Leclerc, but he did 5 laps on those tyres, and then on the mediums, Perez was then P3, and then just behind him was Carlos as well with 6 laps. So relatively similar race pace, tough to say who kind of has the advantage here, but certainly these 4 cars are in a league of their own at the present time. Now, Verstappen kind of has his thoughts over it. Ferrari seems, again, quick over 1 lap. In long runs, though, it's a bit more equal. That is positive. All in all, not a bad day, says Verstappen. Now, of course, Mercedes have also made their thoughts clear on this one, admitting that Mercedes is behind the pace they expected to have. Like, I'm effectively talking a lot to George Russell about the tyres, saying it's tricky to get the tyres in the right window. Of course, you know, the drivers love to say stuff like this, but are saying a lot of drivers, their fastest laps came in at the end of the run. We're struggling to find that. That might be causing like 50% of our issues in getting the tyres warmed up properly, and the rest of it is just pure lack of performance in the car compared to some of the other teams. Like, that was kind of Russell's perspective. Hamilton says the tyres feel to us like they're working okay, so he didn't feel like it was too much of an issue for him, but of course he found himself further back the grid, and he's saying, look, I can't really tell you where this 1.6, 1.3 seconds is even coming from. That's a long way to go. A lot of it is on the straights. That's the thing, they're losing an awful lot of time in the straight line. He does say they tried something experimental for FP2, didn't really work out, so at least we tried it, got data on it, so I guess they're going to change that back for tomorrow and hopefully get closer to the front. But on this pace, like, and really when they've been good so far this season, they've been good in FP2, and today they were absolutely shocking at FP2, so definitely doesn't paint the greatest picture for a competitive weekend with the top teams. But yeah, maybe they just need to turn the engine up a hell of a lot more, because we know they already have a power deficit anyway in this year's engine to the Red Bulls and the Ferraris, and I mean, yeah, their straight line speed is just way down on where it needs to be if they want to actually compete this weekend. And just to mention this as we close out the video about a driver salary cap, big topic of discussion as of late. I thought Vettel had an interesting statement on this. Funny coincidence that the first time teams can actually make money with racing in Formula 1, and something like this, the salary cap for drivers comes and pop up. And of course, Verstappen, who has good reason to say, okay, yeah, let's not make a salary cap here for the drivers, because he's making a fair chunk of change, says that, you know, effectively it's completely wrong to be able to do this. We put our lives on the line and stuff like that. We should get compensated appropriately as a response. But I'm sure this is a topic of discussion which isn't going to go away anytime soon, so we'll stay tuned for that one. But very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.